Good evening. How are you tonight? First baseball game is 3 weeks from now, so it's a good time. It's a good time. My name is Tom Eschen. I am Assistant Vice Chancellor for University Advancement in Arts and Sciences. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Washington University in St. Louis and to the Spring 2024 installment of the Power of Arts and Sciences series. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from Gerald Early, the Merle Kling Professor of Modern Letters and Professor of English and of African and African American Studies here at WashU. Professor Early will discuss his work as a consultant to the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum's newly renovated and reimagined exhibit on Blacks in Baseball. The exhibit will officially open this spring on Memorial Day weekend, and the book he's writing to accompany the exhibit will be released later this fall. These events don't just happen. It takes a couple villages to put events like this together. Special thanks to our colleagues in the Dean of Arts and Sciences office, to our WashU Alumni Association, to the Arts and Sciences Advancement team, and to the many alumni, parents, and friends whose time and generosity make it possible to hear from distinguished and interesting scholars like Professor Early and learn about the incredible academic programs and educational opportunities available at WashU. Donors to the Dean's Annual Fund for Arts and Sciences Excellence, especially members of our Elliott Society, provide the funds to produce events like these. So thanks to those of you who are already donors, and to those of you who are not, I'd be happy to talk to you anytime you like. Be in the back after this is over. We can talk about all the great opportunities to support arts and sciences. In a moment, I'll introduce Feng-Sheng Hu, the Richard G. Engelsman Dean of Arts and Sciences, to the podium. He will introduce Professor Early, and Gerald's presentation will then be followed by a live Q&A. And I'll tell you, we will have people with microphones, but we have a new gadget that Gerald's going to try out for us. This is a tossable microphone, and we're going to see what his fastball is like later on tonight. For those of you joining us on the live stream, please feel free to you can drop your questions for Professor Early in the chat, and we will pass these along to our discussion moderators, and then we'll have available microphones for everybody else. Following all that, you'll be invited to a reception in the Frick Forum just outside these doors, outside the auditorium, and there you'll have an opportunity to chat with Gerald, get selfies with him, autographs, things like that. Dean Hu will be out there as well. And a few housekeeping items to go over before we begin. You all know the drill. Please silence your cell phones, your pagers, your tablets, your watches, any other device that makes a noise, unless it's keeping you alive, and then just turn it down. Also, restrooms are located out those back doors to the left and to the left. Just keep turning left and you will find the restrooms. And now I have the great pleasure of introducing Dean Feng-Sheng Hu, the Richard G. Engelsman Dean of Arts and Sciences and Lucille P. Markey Distinguished Professor. Dean Hu joined WashU as Dean of Arts and Sciences, which, by the way, is the largest school on the Danforth campus and commonly known as the heart and soul of WashU. He joined us in July 2020, overseeing all aspects of its operations and programs. Since taking the helm, he's focused on implementing a bold new shared vision for the future of arts and sciences. In late 2021, he announced the launch of the school's new strategic plan, which will transform scholarship, teaching, research, and impact throughout a decade of arts and sciences at WashU. And after just 1 year, the report card is very good. Arts and Sciences has recruited a large cohort of extraordinary scholars to join its faculty, and just as importantly, retained our own distinguished and renowned faculty. We've developed numerous signature initiatives to spark breakthroughs in transdisciplinary research and education. As you might think, breaking down silos is not easy, but we're doing it. And we spearheaded strategic projects to enhance facilities, including a 120,000 square foot building in the heart of the Danforth campus, a beautiful new home for arts and sciences, and groundbreaking will take place later this fall. So with that, please welcome Dean Feng-Sheng Hu.
Thank you, Tom. And good evening. Good evening. And thank you to the WashU Alumni Association for their time and efforts in co-hosting what I'm sure will be a fascinating presentation. I am delighted to welcome all of you to the second event this year in our Power of Arts and Sciences lecture series. This program is a celebration of the strength and success of our diverse disciplines. Each event is free and open to the public, allowing us to share the impact of our groundbreaking work with our growing network of alumni, friends, and supporters. As Dean, I take great pride in the fact that Arts and Sciences teaches 100% of WashU undergraduates. We are the largest school on the Danforth campus, and we shape the academic experiences of thousands of students each year. Arts and Sciences currently offers an incredible 70 majors of study across 44 departments and programs. And we're now 2 years into the decade of Arts and Sciences, a period of incredible growth that will establish our school as a global model of research and education. There is undeniable momentum across campus as our faculty, staff, and leaders work together to bring a bold strategic plan to life. As we do this exciting work, we are very fortunate to have a stellar community of supporters, including all of you gathered here tonight. You share in our successes, propel our progress, and magnify our impact. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your support. And I now have the distinguished pleasure and honor of introducing my colleague, Dr. Gerald Early, the Merle Kling Professor of Modern Letters and Professor of the Department of African American Studies and the Department of English. Gerald has played a critical role in WashU's success since he joined the university in 1982. He has served in many roles, important roles, as director of the Center for the Humanities and the American Cultural Studies Program, as chair of the Department of African and African American Studies, and most recently as interim director of the Center for the Study of Race, Ethnicity, and Equity. As you can imagine, introducing Gerald in a few minutes is no easy task. Throughout his career, Gerald has thoughtfully explored aspects of America and the Black experience through his essays, anthologies, and commentary. His voice has often been heard on NPR, and his insights were sought after by legendary filmmaker Ken Burns for both his jazz and baseball documentaries. Gerald's scholarship has been widely recognized by some of the nation's leading professional organizations. He is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and was nominated by President Obama to serve on the National Council on the Humanities. He even has a star on the St. Louis Walk of Fame. And even with all the honors and demands on his time, I personally find Gerald remarkable for his enduring desire to explore and to understand, his commitment to our students, and his incredible intellect, curiosity, and approachability. I'm sure that after tonight's presentation and the event after the presentation, you'll feel the same. And over the past few years, Gerald has poured his energy into the Common Reader, WashU's interdisciplinary journal. If you haven't had a chance to engage with this publication, I encourage you to seek it out. You'll find enlightening work that explores everything from aviation to the nuances of gentrification and even to the science of kissing. Tonight, however, we are going to focus on baseball, America's favorite pastime, and we are so fortunate to have Gerald here to share his insights on its history and culture. And as mentioned by Tom, recently he was asked to help reinvent the National Baseball Hall of Fame's exhibit on the sport's Black legacy. The new exhibition in Cooperstown, New York, is scheduled to open Memorial Day weekend this year. Gerald is also writing a book that will accompany the exhibition. Of course, we know that you will reveal so much more than just a game and its players. We are all so eager to hear about this exciting work. And now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gerald Early.
Coming. I really appreciate it. I got to put on these glasses because age has caught up with me. Okay. I can't see you now, but I can see what I got to present. There are going to be pictures that are going to be floating up here. You listen to what I'm saying, all these pictures will make sense. They're part of the story, but I don't need to explain them. Just listen to what I'm going to tell you. My work as a consultant for the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum began in June 2022 when I and 4 other consultants met with a team of curators at the museum in Cooperstown. The other consultants are Rob Ruck, historian at the University of Pittsburgh and author of Sandlot Seasons, Sport in Black Pittsburgh, and The Tropic of Baseball, Baseball in the Dominican Republic. Larry Lester, one of the leading experts on Negro League baseball and author of numerous books on that subject, including his monumental Black Baseball's National Showcase, the East-West All-Star Game, 1933 to 1962. Kent State University's Leslie Heafy, author of the Negro Leagues, 1869 to 1960, an award-winning poet. Rowan Ricardo Phillips, author of the upcoming book on Black baseball, who has written widely on other sports. I could not claim the same accomplishments. I appeared in Ken Burns' 1994 documentary Baseball, and its sequel, The 10th Inning, and in Burns' bio-documentary on Jackie Robinson. I have written essays about baseball and boxing. I was searching for something in these sports that would explain what the United States is and explain what it means to be an American. I am old-fashioned, as the old song goes. There are many who hold these days that being an American is a dubious fate. All the more reason, I suppose, to find the meaning in such a fate. The lead curator, Tom Schreiber, told us at the first meeting that the Hall wanted not simply to update its current exhibit on Black baseball, but to reconceive it. The exhibit at the time of our first meeting was entitled Ideals and Injustices. It was created in 1997 when it was called Pride and Passion. The name was changed to Ideals and Injustices in 2020, partly, I suppose, in response to Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd murder. Current events can do strange things to history, maybe better things. I suppose that any exhibit that has been up for nearly 30 years is bound to get a bit stale and needs to be more than just refreshed. But as anything involving race is bound to be political, it is subject to becoming outdated faster as attitudes change. There is also the issue of giving offense to some segments of the public, an even greater concern now than it was 30 or 40 years ago. One of the curators told the story of how some hall visitors were offended by the word Negro. These were not Black visitors. The hall only gets a small number of Black visitors annually, about 3% of their total. The people who are offended were whites because they thought the term Negro was racist. They did not seem to understand that Negro was a perfectly acceptable term, a preferred term among Blacks until the 1960s. It would be ahistorical and irresponsible to call the Negro Leagues something else, or to refer to the new Negro Renaissance of the 1920s as something else. Black nationalist Marcus Garvey's newspaper was called Negro World. It cannot be called something else now to please current sensibilities. I suppose these people meant well, but history is not meant to calm the conscience or validate the values of any particular group. In any case, this was just a small example of the sort of thing the curators have to be concerned about these days, people being outraged or desiring comfort. Well, I'm going to talk about that shortly. Here is another. Some months later in our process of reconceiving the exhibit, when we arrived at the actual details of various displays that would constitute the exhibit, there was great concern about disclosing that Jackie Robinson was a Republican. It was felt by most of the curators that many younger visitors would not understand the party's history and simply think that Robinson was a Trumpist or a MAGA supporter. There was particular concern about black and white visitors not terribly familiar with Robinson's life who would think that the exhibit denigrated Robinson by identifying him as a Republican or was outright lying. Besides, the fact that Robinson was a Republican wasn't mentioned in the old exhibit. At first, I was sympathetic to this concern and felt it best not to mention Robinson's political affiliations and said so. Leaving that meeting, however, I felt uneasy. As public historians, were we concealing something? We were going to discuss Robinson's political activities, especially his involvement with the Civil Rights Movement. If we were going to show Robinson in this light, it seemed as important to show his friendship with Nelson Rockefeller as to show his friendship with Martin Luther King Jr. Robinson never tried to hide that he was a Republican. And while he had his quarrels with the conservative wing of the GOP, he was in fact unhappy as a Republican, he pointedly refused to become a Democrat. I started to feel that Robinson needed to be understood, not sanitized. The fact that Robinson was a Republican is very important in understanding his life after baseball. He had a strenuous desire to see blacks in business, as producers, as owners of companies, not just as consumers. His belief in black enterprise was not the result of any Uncle Tomism. Quite the opposite. It was the result of his enormous race pride. It was this strong belief that made him a Republican. But now it gets complicated. The irony here is that Robinson, the energetic promoter of black business, hated the Negro Leagues, one of the most ambitious business ventures black Americans ever undertook. He thought the leagues were an incompetently run business. The Negro Leagues, it must be remembered, were not just a black-run business. They were also a racially segregated business in a legally segregated country, which is why they needed white middlemen to succeed. The leagues had all the weaknesses and disadvantages of being racially segregated. They lacked control over their playing venues or their league schedules. There was an inability to enforce the rules governing the movement of players. They were dependent on barnstorming or pickup games to survive. And they were at the mercy of racial segregation in their travel and lodging. The leagues were not a sign of black people having power. They were a sign of black people being compromised and limited. They were a sign of black people's desire for power and organization. So Robinson's view of the Negro Leagues was not wrong, although it was not entirely right either. No matter how flawed the Negro Leagues were, black people lost something when they died. How the leagues died was an American tragedy, and it showed what integration cost black people, but there was no alternative. Robinson's republicanism won't be mentioned in the exhibit, which in the end I realize is for the best. An exhibit is a bit like making a documentary film. Ken Burns once told me that a film cannot bear too much complexity about the ideas it is conveying, otherwise it will sink under its own weight. The same is true of an exhibit. There cannot be too many complex ideas in it, otherwise it will cease to be a story. We consultants met regularly with the curators in 2022 and 2020 into 2023 about every month or so. We started from scratch, at first coming up individually with what we thought were the important stories about black baseball. Of course, we had to define black baseball, and this process of coming up with stories helped us to do that. The 4 assumptions we adopted were: 1, black baseball before integration must be understood on its own terms and not as a shadow or imitation of white baseball. Black baseball leagues were not shadow institutions. 2, the exhibit had to be a celebration of blacks playing baseball. The public had to know that blacks have always played baseball for almost as long as whites have in this country. Playing baseball meant something special to the black people who played it and the black people who watched it, no matter how precarious the existence of black baseball was. 3, black institutions, especially the black press, strongly supported black baseball for all of its existence as a segregated sport. And 4, the voices in the exhibit had to be black voices. The insistence that the exhibit had to be from a black perspective or a black point of view, and that all the voices had to be black, in my view, was the most important of all the assumptions that were to govern our work. The exhibit was not to be told from some curator's point of view, or at least that was to be avoided as much as possible. This is what you might call history from the ground up rather than from the top down. There were other considerations. For instance, the exhibit is not solely focused on the Negro Leagues, an assumption a lot of people make. There is an entire museum in Kansas City devoted to the Negro Leagues. We were not interested in competing with that, nor would we be capable of it. The hall has only 620 square feet for this exhibit. The size of this space might lead some of you to think that the hall should look only at some period of black baseball, and not its entire history. But most visitors would want a more comprehensive approach, and younger visitors would be put off by an exhibit that spotlighted black players that they never heard of. All of us felt it was important that black baseball be seen not simply as historical, but as something modern, as something current. Besides, the exhibit we were replacing covered black baseball from the end of the Civil War through the modern day. Another thing that must be remembered is that the Negro Leagues lasted only 40 years, the final 10 years of which were almost zombie baseball, as most black fans and the black press had gone over to the major leagues after Robinson broke in with the Dodgers. Major League Baseball has been integrated for 77 years. The experience of all generations born since World War II, from the baby boomers to Generation Z, has been with integrated baseball. When I was a boy and baseball mad, I would dismiss the older black men in the barbershop who would talk about how great the Negro Leagues were. And this is the baseball that they knew as boys in the 30s and 40s. That was then, and now is now, my friends and I would say contemptuously, because we followed the black ball players of the 1960s. If what they had was so great, we would sneer, how come it's not around anymore? And we don't want to hear nothing about no Jackie Robinson. The story of integrated baseball is just as important as the story of the Negro Leagues. In understanding how generational change has affected black people's view of baseball, there may still be many black people who love baseball, but they do not all love the same baseball. How did black players change baseball and change America when the major leagues integrated? How did black fans change Major League Baseball? Fawcett Comics, which you saw up there, put out a series of comic books starting in 1949 about Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, Roy Campanella, and Don Newcomb, the first black stars of the major leagues. These comics would not have appeared if these men had stayed in the Negro Leagues. Their impact was because they had become major league players and had moved into the mainstream of American popular culture. Of the black baseball stories I contributed to our very early meetings, the one that actually wound up being a part of the new exhibit was about the ball players who won the NAACP Spingarn Medal. Since 1915, the NAACP began awarding this medal annually for outstanding achievement by an African American. Only 2 athletes have won it. Both of them were baseball players. Jackie Robinson won the medal in 1956 and Hank Aaron in 1976. They won the award in the year they retired from baseball. It is easy to see why Robinson was given the prize, as he was the first black in the 20th century to play with whites in the major leagues. Aaron may not seem so obvious. He was an extraordinary player, but there were many blacks who were extraordinary players. Probably he got it because he broke Babe Ruth's career home run record in 1974 under some duress. He is the only player I have come across who in the 1960s read books by James Baldwin. And if that doesn't make him special, nothing will. When Robinson was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1962, Ebony magazine wrote, quote, "Although thrilled by his election to the Hall of Fame, Robinson does not regard it as the greatest reward of an exciting life. He cherishes the NAACP's 1956 Spingarn Medal because, as he says, it means you've made a significant contribution to race relations and the Negro struggle for equality, and I sincerely hope I have," unquote. He prized the Spingarn Medal over being in the Hall of Fame. What is most striking is that such important black athletes as Wilma Rudolph, Muhammad Ali, Jim Brown, Arthur Ashe, Joe Louis, Jesse Owens, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Althea Gibson, Jackie Joyner-Kersee, Bill Russell, the Williams sisters, among many others, have never won the Spingarn Medal. The curators who were not familiar with this award, but once they discovered the prestige of it, decided to display Aaron's medal, since Aaron gave the Hall all of his memorabilia. All that is, except the medal. The curators could not find it. The new exhibit will have Robinson's medal on display on loan from the Jackie Robinson Museum in New York. Black baseball was special to the NAACP. About a year into the process, the matter of the title of the exhibit arose. It was impossible to think of one, or let's say it was impossible to think of a good one. Many titles were suggested. Tom, the head curator, wanted to avoid a title that required a colon. Finally, someone suggested Soul of the Game, which is the name of a movie about Jackie Robinson, Josh Gibson, and Satchel Paige. One of the consultants objected to this title because he did not like the use of the word soul, which he thought was a racial cliche or stereotype. Tom began toying with souls of the game, simply making it plural to deflect from the soul stereotype. I mentioned, and probably someone else did as well, that it echoed W.E.B. Du Bois's famous 1903 book, The Souls of Black Folk, and that a few people might think that the title of the exhibit is paying homage to Du Bois. Of course, Du Bois's book is not about baseball, and Du Bois never mentioned baseball in anything he wrote. Also, it can be safely said that 99.9% of the people visiting the hall would not only have never read The Souls of Black Folk, but they would never have even heard of it. Nonetheless, Souls of the Game won out. Having a connection with Du Bois's book seemed to give the title a kind of gravitas, and I guess it gives black baseball itself a kind of gravitas. The larger advisory board for the exhibit, which includes many black ex-players, among them Ozzie Smith, also approved of the title once the connection to Du Bois was explained. Alas, the title does have a colon. Souls of the Game, colon, Voices of the Black Baseball Experience. All the consultants had been told that a book was planned to accompany the exhibit. Nothing unusual in that. We were each to contribute an essay, and at first it seemed as if the book would be a collection of essays, with the consultants' essays being joined by some invited guest writers. When I was asked to consider becoming the main writer of the book, I met with the editor from the publishing house as well as the Hall's publication department. At that meeting, I suggested that the book would probably sell better if it were not a collection of essays, but rather a narrative history of black baseball with occasional essays distributed throughout the book. This is actually what everybody wanted. I agreed to write the narrative, largely because I wanted to say something in a sustained way about black baseball, and wanted to at least in part orchestrate the book as a whole. Because the book was going to combine a narrative history with short specialized essays, it felt almost symphonic to me, overarching thematic movements punctuated by soloists. I was willing to do the book for nothing, but luckily, I don't have to. At a subsequent Zoom meeting, the issue of the title of the book arose. I, along with the owner of the publishing house, as well as the publishing house editor and the Hall's publication team, were all at the meeting. Souls of the Game felt a bit too abstract or poetic for the title of the book, the publisher felt. He wanted a title more grounded in baseball, something that the players actually said. But it had to be short. He suggested, "Let's Play 2," something that Chicago Cubs Hall of Famer Ernie Banks was famous for having said. Banks had played in the Negro Leagues, but became a big star and had a long career as a major league player. The problem with Let's Play 2 is that it has been used as the title of two biographies of Banks that incredibly came out in the same year. Not only had it already and recently been used, but it was so associated with Banks that people would likely think that our book would be another Banks biography, not a book about black baseball history. I suggested Play Harder, saying it had the virtue of being short, of being obviously connected to sport, and was something that the black players actually said. They were not at first enthusiastic about this title, but then I started to read to them the actual quotes from black players using this expression or some variant of it. I had most of my trouble in Danville, Virginia, in the Carolina League in '56. I think that's why I hit so many home runs that year, 51 of them, and 166 RBIs. Insults pushed me to play harder, Leon Wagner. Being a human being, I never thought people were going to be like that, making me live alone, go nowhere, and get poor pay. But what can you do? You can't do nothing except you play harder, Vic Power. Mr. Paul gave me a choice. Did I want to go to a club he would pick, or would I prefer to return to Columbia? I decided on Columbia. Most of the local fans had been fair to me. The others had sort of goaded me into playing harder, Frank Robinson. I had constant trouble with baiters in Burlington Graham, North Carolina. The more the fans gave it to me, the harder I hit the ball. So they eventually decided to leave me alone, which was a victory over bigotry, Bill White. In southern ballparks, I was subjected to the same kind of name-calling that greeted high school students in Little Rock and college students in Mississippi and Alabama in recent years. And not only in the South, as I learned when I became a Giant, I retaliated by playing harder, Monty Irving. As I continued to read the quotes, everybody was convinced that not only did black players use this expression, but it had a special meaning during the time when Major League Baseball first began to integrate. It was both aspirational and militant. It was an expression of resistance against failure. I refuse to fail, is what the players were saying when they used it. Playing baseball was the triumph of their will. So Play Harder became the title of the book. I will leave you with this. Lots of people think pitcher Satchel Paige, probably the most famous of all the Negro League players, was a clown, an Uncle Tom, a step-and-fetch-it type. But he grew up an angry and bitter boy in Mobile, Alabama in the 19-teens. He hated the racism and segregation he had to endure. He, along with other black boys, got into rock fights with white gangs. Page became the champion of his black gang when it was discovered he could throw rocks with unerring accuracy. The rock throwing, the shoplifting, the school truancy eventually got him sentenced to the Alabama Reform School for Juvenile Negro Lawbreakers in Mount Meade, Alabama. He was there from 1918 to 1923 until he was 17 and a half years old. The school was run by Cornelia Bowen, a graduate of Tuskegee and disciple of Booker T. Washington. Washington believed that baseball could rehabilitate some wayward black boys. And it was in this school that Page, who had played some sandlot baseball, learned the full fundamentals of the game. He left reform school with an electric arm and a blazing fastball. As he himself admitted, those Booker T. Washington folks saved his life. I was moved when I learned this story. There is an old black show tune called "What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue?" Just like Page, that was made famous by trumpeter Louis Armstrong, also called Satchel or Satch, just like Page. And like Armstrong, Page was a black entertainer from the old school, and that is how he must be understood. Through baseball, I have come to understand a bit what being an American meant to men like Page. And through baseball, I have come to understand what life meant to them. I have come to understand what those men in the barbershop were trying to tell me about baseball when I was a boy. As I have been working on this book, I have come to understand what my Aunt Lois told me when she spoke of going to Shibe Park in Philly in 1947 with my mother when they were both teenagers, and they screamed their heads off for Jackie Robinson and dared any white person sitting nearby to say anything about it. I learned this from their uneasy, trying past as Americans who persevered. It is this one simple lesson, this one stern discipline. Always play harder. Thank you. Okay, I'm supposed to take questions, right? Sir.
It was good to see the St. Louis Browns, who were breakers into the integration as well shortly after Jackie. The pictures up there with Satchel's uniform and Jackie's.
Yeah.
But what intrigued me is at your beginning, because I was up recently at the Jackie Robinson Museum doing some research.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find Jackie's thoughts on Ruth Foster, who led the Negro Leagues in the early years, and some people said he exploited the African-American players to an extent.
Yeah.
Did you come across any of that?
Robinson saying anything about Ruth Foster?
Yes.
No, I haven't come across anything. Robinson saying anything particularly about Ruth Foster. Robinson, Robinson wrote a couple of different autobiographies, I should say, and the one that is most referred to as "I Never Had It Made," which was his last one. And he talks about the Negro Leagues in there, but he doesn't talk about the history of the Negro Leagues. He just confines himself to talking about his time with the Kansas City Monarchs. He played for the Monarchs for 5 months. He played one season in 1945 with the Monarchs. So I'm not aware of how much Jackie Robinson knew about the history of the Negro Leagues, that it was just something he got into because, it was a job, and he needed a job after he got out of the Army. His article in Ebony magazine, which was so inflammatory, the article was called "What's Wrong with Negro League Baseball" in Ebony magazine, 1948, which inflamed a lot of people because that's where he laid out all his criticisms about the Negro Leagues. Was not really about the leagues historically. It was about his experience with them and why he thought they were not run very well, and he thought they were not very successful. He thought they were a business that disrespected the athletes. He felt very strongly about that they disrespected the athletes. So I can't say anything about Robinson looking at the league from a historical point of view, but I can say that from everything I've read, that how he looked at the league from his experience in the league led him to think that the league was terrible. And of course, you know, there were people who took issue with that and said, man, you're only in the league for 5 months, you know? And Satchel Paige had been in the league for years, man, decades. I mean, if somebody's going to complain about the league, it should be me. You know, Robinson was a very interesting and complicated man. I hope that kind of came across a little bit in the remarks I gave, that he was a very complicated man. Yes, sir.
You talked about,
Oh.
Thank you. You talked about baseball being part of the Black American experience. As a historian, yet when you look at baseball today, I mean, the number of black players in the major leagues is probably its smallest percentage since probably the 40s or 50s. What do you think of that, the way that's kind of changed over time?
Well, you know, that's going to be part of the exhibit. The exhibit is going up to, you know, the most recent times, and it will address the issue of blacks being fans of baseball as well as blacks playing baseball. Now, of course, we have to make a distinction here. Black Americans playing baseball is a very small number now, about 6%. Black people, Latino people playing baseball is quite high. I mean, they make up close to 30% of the people playing baseball. So there are black people in this world who love playing baseball and who are playing it with a great deal of vigor. It just happens not to be black Americans who are doing it. And so I think that's something to look into. Part of it, it's difficult to say. I mean, some of it has to do with the popularity of baseball itself. Part of it has to do with the availability of younger black people to play baseball and to go out and see it, and how much is being encouraged among black people for black people to go out and see baseball and to play it. And baseball, if you look at any polls about the popularity of sports, you'll find out that baseball, among black people, the popularity of the sport is very low. What I find, there's a very funny thing that Chris Rock did on baseball. Chris Rock is a big baseball fan. You can go look this up on YouTube. It's because it's funny and it's sad. When he talks about baseball having become, baseball is a white guy's sport. And it's funny what he says in it, and some of it is an exaggeration. But what's touching about it is that he's this black baseball fan who feels like he's kind of out of touch with baseball and even out of touch with other black people because so many black people are no longer engaged with baseball. So I found that routine to be actually rather moving in a way, even though it was sort of meant to be funny. But it's complicated about black American engagement with the game today. It's a complicated thing. I could, but I don't want to go into it now. But it's, you know, I've given you a few clues about it, I hope. Major League Baseball is trying to re-engage black people with the game, trying to reach out to black fans, trying to reach out to kids to play the game. It's very important if you're going to produce black Americans who are going to play the game as professionals to do that. We'll see what happens. Yes, sir.
So it seems from your clues that the term always play harder does not carry as much passion among black Americans and black ball players as it has in the past.
Well, I would say play harder as a kind of metaphorical phrase or something like that. It probably still plays. It just plays differently than it might have played before. But I do think that things are different now, and you have to understand that and respect that. That's the reason why I think looking at black people having played baseball in the past, in many ways, is actually rather touching. I mean, I once said at one of our meetings, I said, I want people, when they go into this exhibit at the hall, I want people, black, white, whatever, I want them to come out, and I want them to almost be in tears, and I want them to think that black people playing baseball in this country made this country a better place. That's what I want that exhibit to do. And they thought that was a nice speech. But I think Play Harder was something of goes beyond just sports, about black people wanting to make a particular kind of effort to be part of the country. And the thing that I think is uplifting for all of us is to think about black people wanting to make this effort because they thought being an American was worth the effort. And I think that's something that's very important for people to know.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am. You had your hand up.
Thank you, Dr. Early. My name is Sharice Harris. This is my mother, Denise, and your dear wife, Miss Ida. I went on the Paris Noir trip in 2019.
Yes.
It was just absolutely wonderful, so knowledgeable. It was about jazz. But I had a question. We came in just a smidgen, a little late. I don't know if it was already addressed, but about the Negro Leagues. Did they indeed start at the baseball field at Harris-Stowe, like at Compton and Market?
Somebody is saying. I don't. Are you talking about a particular team? The league itself was formed in Kansas City. The first Negro League, the first permanent Negro League, was formed in Kansas City by a man by the name of Andrew Rube Foster, who had been a pitcher and a manager and had been saying for many years that black people needed to form a league. And that's the only way we're going to be taken seriously as ball players if we form a league. And in 1920, he formed this league, which was a tremendous accomplishment. It was a tremendous accomplishment to form this league. The league, had its ups and downs, but he kept the league together. Now he wasn't necessarily somebody you want to work with necessarily. I mean, he had like a strong man kind of mentality about what he was doing. But that was where the league first started, and that was where the articles were signed for the formation of the league and so forth. Now, there might have been a team that had been playing here because there were black teams that played in St. Louis. But the league, the first league, there were other leagues that came too, but the first honest-to-God bona fide league came in Kansas City, Rube Foster, 1920, February 1920.
Okay, thank you. Which is where the huge museum is now. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. I'll get to you in just a second. Yes, sir.
The impact of Curt Flood, and because he felt that he was, and I guess if I remember correctly, he thought he was an indentured slave to the owners. Is it addressed in your exhibit?
Yeah, I mean, Curt Flood gets it gets time in the exhibit. I mean, for sure, because what he did, whether people agree with what he did or not, was really important. The other thing that people need to remember is that what he did was done with the approval of the players' union. He didn't do something that was against the players' union. They supported him doing this and doing this thing. And one of the things they asked him, the players did when he decided he was going to do this and everything was, are you doing this, they asked him, because of a race thing? Is this a race thing for you? And he said, no, it's not. I'm doing it for the players. And they said, okay, fine. As long as we understand that you're doing this for the players, man, and everything, and it's not a race thing, then we're cool. And, so they actually supported him. And so he lost that battle, but, it was one of those things, you lose the battle, but you wind up winning the war. But Curt Flood, yeah, he's there. Yeah, he's there. It would be hard to do an exhibit like this, whether you liked what he did or didn't like, or you liked his expression about, being a slave or not, because people said, oh, you're making $90,000. That was a lot of money then. You're making $90,000 a year. How can you call yourself a slave or something like that? He meant that he didn't have the same right. What he meant by a slave, which probably was not the best word he could have used, was that he didn't have the right to take his abilities and his wares to any employer in Major League Baseball. That he was confined because of the reserve clause to this one employer. That's what he thought was a form of slavery, that the market couldn't work for him as it can for other people who work. And that's what he thought was bad. Slavery was probably not the best term to use, but that was his fight. That was the players' fight. And as you can see from the salaries today, the players won. Yes?
I want that microphone.
Oh, yeah.
Hello.
I was once that way.
This is not a microphone.
Oh, really? That's what you said.
That's what you told me. Hello. Oh. Gotta get a drink out of it first. So
There you are.
So having been to both the Negro Leagues Museum in Kansas City, which I adored completely, and was so looking forward to the same museum in Cooperstown, and was greatly let down by that portion of Cooperstown.
Mm-hmm.
So I am so happy to hear that you're doing a renaming and an updating of that portion of Cooperstown, because frankly, it did not do service to the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, well, we hope that, you'll go back up and see this new thing and, you'll really like it. It's been modernized. It's going to have electronic stuff in it, and all that kind of, it's going to have a little film. It's going to have all that kind of stuff in it too. It's going to be really nice. And I tip my hat to the people at the hall, because they were really committed and really serious about wanting to do this right and really wanting to do it well. And they deserve a lot of credit for that.
Tom Schreiber is excellent.
Two more.
At whatever he does. Tom Schreiber
Yes.
is excellent at whatever he does.
Yeah, Tom's a guy, man. Tom's a mensch, whatever the word. Yeah, he's that. Tom's a good guy. I like Tom a lot. Learned a lot from him too. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Early, for your brilliant lecture. I was wondering if you could share some, just a succinct story or statistic that to you really drives home the power that integration of black players had in the baseball leagues in terms of changing attitudes of white Americans towards black Americans.
Well, when black people integrated baseball, by 1960, the majority of players who won the most valuable player award in the National League were black. In 1960, from 1947 to 1960. That's incredible. That's just incredible that the majority of between that time would turn out to be black. You don't even have to like baseball to just be stunned by something like that. It's just incredible that these men came and did. That's one statistic. The number of blacks during this time who won the Rookie of the Year award, the number of blacks at this time who led the league in hitting, who led the league in home run. It was just incredible that this incredible talent had been suppressed. That's what makes Satchel Paige's story so heartbreaking for me. Here's a man who had to stay in baseball as long as he did, partly because he didn't know how to do anything else, but partly because he was so desperate about wanting to play in the major leagues. He was angry that Jackie Robinson was chosen first. And he wanted to play, and he's over the hill. He's just a shell of himself of what he used to be. And he's in his 40s, but he's still hanging in there to play. And he finally gets to play in 1948 with Cleveland. And to me, there's something heartbreaking about that story, but there's also something about the human spirit in that story that really, really lifts me up, that this man believed in himself to that extent that he would hang in there as long as he did, long past his prime as a player, and finally got his shot, you know. Man, you know, I was thinking, man, you know, I hope, yeah, perseverance, man. I hope I have half that much perseverance in my life as that, man. That is something. I'm telling you that the story of these people playing this game. I didn't even talk about women because there are women who played black baseball. And, you know, there's a story about the women playing back. You'll get the book. When my book comes out, it'll be in the book, you know. So get the book, and it will be about the black women who played in the Negro Leagues and the black woman owner of the Newark Eagles, Effa Manley. So, you know, you get the book. So, you know, it'll make a nice Christmas gift, you know. So get the book. Thank you. I was told I couldn't take any more questions.
Thank you, Gerald. I think they liked it. And we do have, as a small token of our appreciation, and I do mean small,
That's okay.
it's a very nice,
You don't take a job at a university expecting to become rich.
it's much more expensive than it looks. Actually, it's a beautiful, iconic Arts and Sciences red ampersand lapel pin.
Okay, here we are.
How about that? And how about that arm? How about that fastball? Yeah, very good. Thank you for joining us. Those of you here, we'll see you outside in the Frick Forum, where you can chat with Gerald. And everybody, we will see you at the next Power of Arts and Sciences. Thank you very much. Good night.